I was at the bottom of my class when I got to Duke Law School. I had the lowest college acumen and the lowest LSAT in the class. I was a CB student with a scattering of, I don't think I ever had an A at Wesleyan. I got some A's at Worcester, but that was not, and right at the beginning of law school, about 70% of the class had Phi Beta Kappa keys on. Man, were these guys proud of their Phi Beta Kappa keys. and we all wore coats and ties to law school. And so right there in their lapel is Phi Beta Kappa key. And that went on for about 2 weeks. And then in property class, I'll never forget, one of the kids with a Phi Beta Kappa key on was having trouble. And and the professor goes, up, don't let that Phi Beta Kappa key strangle you. Just remember, the practice of law is 99% hard work and 1% Phi Beta Kappa. And all the Phi Beta Kappa keys disappeared. So I thought that was just wonderful. And our class consisted of 99 white guys and 1 woman. That's how it was in 1963. It was still the South. Now, at the beginning of our second year, we acquired another woman and a black guy. So we got it.
You're integrated.
We were well, and Jeannie taught at Durham High School the 3 years I was in law school. And the second year, my second year of law school, her second year of teaching, they integrated Durham High School. There was much discussion about this, and they brought in about 12 black kids to join the student body at Durham High School, and there was much worry and anticipation, and then at the first football game of that year, one of the black kids caught the kickoff, the opening kickoff, and ran it back for a touchdown. And all of a sudden, it didn't sound like it was such a bad idea to have the black kids in
It was the very first play of the first game.
The very first play of the first game was just, the timing couldn't have been better.
Right. So you're in November of your first year in law school, and President Kennedy was shot.
Oh, that was, I was playing pickup basketball at Cameron Indoor Stadium, the place where the Duke basketball team plays. I was in Cameron Indoor Stadium playing pickup basketball, and somebody came in and said the president's been shot. And we all went down to the trainer's room, and the trainer had a TV, and we gathered around this TV, and I'll never forget Walter Cronkite looked up at somebody stuck a note under him, and he looked up and he said, "The President of the United States is dead." And he stood up and walked off the stage, or walked off the set, because he couldn't control himself. Now, when Walter Cronkite can't control himself. And it was an incredible shock. School was canceled. I believe it was a Thursday. Friday. School. Oh, I know. We had school on Saturdays. We went to law school 6 days a week, and I think on that particular day, Jeannie had driven our little Volkswagen to school. she had a good friend who was also a English teacher at Durham High School, whose husband was working, was a medical student. And the two of them often, either John or I had to take the two of them to school, or they took one of our cars. And I had friends who also lived in so I could get a ride to the law school. And I think I had gotten a ride that particular day. And Jeannie drove in and just came running into our apartment. And I mean, she was really, everybody was upset. It was a terrible weekend. And then the guy that shot Lee Harvey Oswald was murdered by Jack Ruby right on TV. It was like the whole world was falling apart. But it turned out the whole world didn't fall apart, and we continued. And what happened to me at law school was absolutely unbelievable. Okay, what I knew, the having a relatively poor college record and LSAT, and a wife who was teaching school to put me through law school, failure was not an option. And I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life that first year of law school. And I typed my briefs. All the reading we did was cases. And what you do is you put the facts, then the question, and then the holding. And I had that typed on the left-hand side of the back of a loose-leaf notebook, so I could pull the pages out and put them in my typewriter. When I was in 7th grade, they had debate at Worcester at junior high school, and I liked it. So the summer between 7th and 8th grades, I taught myself to type. And when I got to Duke Law School, I had a Smith Corona portable electric typewriter, which was an unconscionable advantage, because I typed all my briefs, and after law, I took my notes in class on yellow pad, and came back to the apartment and typed the notes right after each class, or not each class. The classes were all in the morning, and the first thing I did in the afternoon was to type up my notes and then do the readings for the next day. And I always went to class totally prepared. And the law professors are just the meanest people that ever came down the pike. And their object is to humiliate the students. Well, I said, well, this is just like debate. I said, what you do in debate is you go prepared. So I always came to class prepared, and pretty soon the professors figured out that I was always prepared, and frequently I was called on at the end of the discussion to explain what was really going on, because the professors came to know that I knew what was going on. At the end of my first year of law school, I had gotten myself a position at the Critchfield Law Firm here in Worcester to work there for the summer. And Jeannie and I were living at my parents' house. And one day Jeannie called me up and she said, David, I need to meet you in the parking lot behind the law firm. I've got something I want to show you. I said, well, what is it? She says, you just come out to the parking lot and I'll show you. And she came down and she had the postcard that I had left at Duke Law School to get my grades. And I had all A's and B's except one C in criminal law, which was and it was the highest C you could get. I mean, numerically. And so I mean, and they just A's and B's they don't give out. I mean, typically in a class of 100, there'd be maybe 1 A and 4 B's, and the rest would be C's. And I just knocked my socks off, and I was sure that what I had heard about how the grading system worked was wrong. So
when you were taking are the exams at the end of the year, or?
Yes.
Yeah. So did you feel good about it when you were taking it, or did you think?
No. It turns out, and at least my experience in law school was the worse I felt about the job I had done on an exam, the better I had done. My predictions were absolutely, but they let me type the exams. I would take an exam and go down to the typing room in the law library. It was honor system, but it doesn't make any difference. There's no way to cheat if you don't know how to handle this stuff. The answers are not in any book. And on a 45-minute question, I would spend 30 minutes reading, thinking, organizing, analyzing, and then in 15 minutes I would type 3 times more than the guys upstairs could write in the full 45 minutes.
And you were the only person typing?
No, there were frequently other people typing, and that didn't bother me a bit. It bothered other people. I told my friends, this was, being able to type the exams was terrific. And there were guys that tried it, and they came down and they said, Noble, you make me crazy because you can type so fast.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Africa and Duke being transformative, but hearing this story, that summer between 7th and 8th grade,
that was transformative too.
Laid the seeds for all of the other things.
My debate experience laid the seeds. Worcester High School has sent more representatives to more national speech tournaments than any other high school in the country, and I was one of them. At the end of my senior year, right after high school graduation, I went to the National Speech Tournament as a member of the National Student Congress, and the whole thing was held in Miami, and my best friend from high school got to go to this in extempt, and so the two of us went down there, and then the second year, after the second year of law school, I worked for a big law firm in Milwaukee. The name of the firm was Foley, Salmon and Lardner, and I went and worked for that firm because they paid more than any other firm paid. I got a job there, and I had a fine summer. It wasn't all that. The work wasn't all that interesting, but and at the end of the summer, each of the young associates, we were called second years, goes in to see the managing partner, and some got job offers and some didn't. He had a psychologist who gave us some kind of tests, and I spent maybe half an hour chatting with us. And I did not get an offer. And I'm convinced that it was because this psychologist figured out that I had ADHD and probably would not be good, and I wouldn't have been good in a staid banking kind of practice. They were superb corporate lawyers, and the kind of lawyers that made lots of money. but probably not a kind of lawyer that where I would have been happy. So it was a good thing. And then I went to Arnold and Porter. I knew about Arnold and Porter because Bob Critchfield at the Critchfield Law Firm had used them on a number of occasions when some of his corporate clients had antitrust problems or other things of that sort. And somehow I got myself an interview there and went there. Jeannie and I had gone back to Durham, and we had to get to Durham like 2 weeks in advance of law school starting because Durham High School started earlier than law school did. So it was during that time I went up and interviewed at Arnold and Porter, and basically what they said was, why don't you have your dean write us a letter of recommendation? So I came back from visiting Washington and immediately went to see Dean Laddie, told him I needed a recommendation, and he smiled and he said, I'm not going to write them a letter, I'm going to call them. And that afternoon there was a note about this big, a little pink note in my mailbox that said, everything okay at A&P, ERL, which is the dean's initials. Well, that looked good to me, but it didn't sound like a job offer. And at that point, I was third in my class. So, and I was getting offers. I mean, not me. My friends were all getting offers to go to Los Angeles and Atlanta and Chicago and New York, and were coming home with these stories about being wined and dined and taken care of. I got no offers. I went to all these interviews. I get no offers. None. So Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey, a big law firm in Cleveland, comes to Durham, and the guy from Squire Sanders interviews me, and I figure, well, if I can't go to any of these other big cities, certainly I'd get myself a free ride to Cleveland. And this guy says, David, you're an Ohio boy. You're just exactly what we're looking for at Squire Sanders. He says, but the dean tells me you're going to Arnold and Porter, and I can't compete with them. That's the reason I'm not getting any offers from anybody.
I see.
And then early November, I get a letter from Arnold and Porter. Actually, at that point, it was Arnold, Fortas, and Porter. There was a fellow named Fortas, you might recall, ended up on the Supreme Court. And that happened when I was a senior in law school.
That he was on the Supreme Court.
That he was, and his partners told me a really interesting story about how Fortas got on the Supreme Court. I mean, Fortas and Lyndon Johnson had been buddies for 30 years. And I mean, when Kennedy got shot, Lyndon, one of the first calls Lyndon made was to Abe Fortas. And apparently the conversation went something like this. Abe, you get your goddamn ass to the bottom of that staircase. I'm in more damn trouble than I've ever been in my entire life, and I need you in the limousine with me. We got to talk about this when I land at Andrews. And that's the way it was. And one day, Lyndon called up Abe and said, Abe, I'm going to put Goldberg in the United Nations. I'm going to put you on the Supreme Court. And Abe said, Lyndon, you have had more dumb ideas than any 10 people I know, but of all the dumb ideas you've ever had, that's the dumbest. I don't want to be a judge. I wouldn't be a good judge. Forget it. Don't put me on the Supreme Court. All right. Abe, Lyndon calmed down. they hung up. Next thing happens, the Washington press corps starts calling Abe, asking him if he's going to accept the nomination to the Supreme Court. And he tells all of them that they're onto a bad rumor, and he isn't going to do it. It didn't happen. But at that point, he got worried. So he goes down and talks to Dennis Lyons, the guy who does more Supreme Court advocacy than anybody else in the firm. And he says, what does a damn Supreme Court justice make? And Dennis told him at that time it was $60,000 a year. And he said, I can't afford to be a Supreme Court justice. He was knocking down about $400,000 a year. And so that was the end of things for about 3 days. Then Abe gets a call from the White House that the president wants him at a press conference, which was not unusual. So Abe packed up his bags and went over to the White House. He got suspicious when they escorted him down to a front seat at the press conference, and Lyndon gets up and says, I'm going to appoint the great American Abe Fortas to the Supreme Court. And of course, what can Abe do but get up and say, thank you, Mr. President? And for 2 weeks after that, Abe's wife would not talk to the President of the United States. He'd call her up and Carolyn would hang up on him. And so that's how Abe got it on the Supreme Court, according to his partners. And then in the last semester of law school, we're talking the spring of 1966, when there was a great big buildup going on in Vietnam. And I started getting all kinds of funny notices from my draft board, which were concerning. I even ended up taking a physical for the draft when I was in Durham. And so I wanted to know what was going to happen to me. So spring vacation of my senior year of law school, we came home to Worcester, and one afternoon I put on my coat and tie and went down to the draft board office in the 345 building and walked in, and there was a lady behind the desk, and I introduced myself and told her that I was interested in what plans they might have for me. And she said, one moment, please, and disappeared through a door. And I'm standing there, and she's gone, and I don't know, 20 minutes goes by, and I'm wondering what's going on. And finally, she comes out of the door, and all this, she stands very erect and says, although you've not made an appointment to see your draft board to see you at this time. There they were. The 5 guys I least wanted to know in my entire life were sitting in there, and I go in and I start explaining to them how I'd make a much better lawyer than soldier, and they agreed with me, but told me that doesn't count. So they said, but we see that you're married. I said, this is true. I said, is there any chance your wife is pregnant? I said, well, there's a chance, but I don't think so. I said, any chance your wife could be pregnant by September? I said, yes. I said, now that's a horse of another color. We'll see what we can do about that. He said, well, if you can get us a doctor's certificate by September saying that your wife is pregnant, your problems with us will be over. And I said, understood. Well, the birth control pills went out the window, and you know, during that time there was a wonderful slogan, "Make love, not war." That's what I did. That's what Jeannie and I did. And my oldest son is, I named my oldest son for his grandfather, so he's Donald Edgar Noble II, but that's not what his initials stand for. His initials stand for draft exemption. So that's how I avoided the Vietnam War. And so once that was settled down in the fall of 1966, I stopped worrying about the Vietnam War. They kept having body counts on the news, but it didn't affect me because I was working for Arnold and Porter. And until February of 1968, and I got a call from the wife of my best friend from high school to tell me that Russell had been killed in Vietnam. Terrible war, terrible war. I had never quite figured out what we were doing over there, but the minute we lost Russell, I knew it wasn't worth it. Just
Before then, had you, I mean, certainly there were lots of protests going on and the country was pretty divided. Were you sort of connected to that or
no,
not?
I knew that I didn't know enough to make a decision one way or the other, except that I didn't understand it. That I was clear that I didn't understand it, but then I had never made any study of it, so I didn't figure. I knew that I didn't want to go. That I was clear about.
Not because you were against the war, but because you had other things to do.
I was scared. Oh, I didn't want to get shot at. I mean, I had this lovely wife, and I wanted to be with her.
Did you talk to Russell before he left about
No,
service?
no. Well, yes, I had. And he was gung-ho. He wanted to be in the military. He wanted to be an infantry leader. And he was I think he was a second, he was either a first lieutenant or a captain. And he was leading troops in the jungles. And yes, Russell and I had talked, and I knew what he was doing. And so, but it still came as a terrible shock.
Yeah.
One thing I did during the third year of law school was I got a pilot's license. when one of the things I thought I might not want to do when I was a senior in college was to be a fighter pilot. So I went to visit a recruiter, an Air Force recruiter, and said, I'd like to be a fighter pilot. And they said, how tall are you? And I said, 6'5". And they said, well, you're 2 inches too tall to be a fighter pilot. We'd love to have you fly bombers or transports, but you can't fly fighters. I said, look, if you're not going to let me fly those things that go straight up, I'm not interested. And so I figure I missed the Hanoi Hilton by 2 inches.
Well, but this was in high school, so this was like.
No, this was in law school and in college.
But your first idea of being a fighter pilot
was in college.
was I see.
Senior in college.
Senior in college.
When
So
I
the
was-
war was going on.
No, this was 1963.
Oh yeah, 63.
63.
It was sort of going on.
It was sort of going on, but there was
So
no.
you weren't thinking when you went to the recruiter that you would end up in Vietnam.
Absolutely
You thought
not.
you'd just get to fly.
Well, I thought I'd
That'd be fun.
just fly fighter jets and nothing would happen and it just would be a lot of fun. Well, I'm sure glad I didn't end up doing that. So I have been exceptionally fortunate. But the idea of flying appealed to me, and I persuaded my dad to give me the money to take flying lessons while I was in my third year of law school. I had more fun than you can possibly imagine. Wrote an article for the Law Journal, edited the Law Journal, took flying lessons, got great grades in my courses, and got a job with Arnold and Porter, one of the best firms in the country.